Talking about here on my channel right now. It's all about Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively's.
Hollywood always pretends to be a world carved out of gold, a place where everyone smiles for the cameras and pretends the universe bends around their fame. But those who have seen the cracks, those who have stood behind the curtains, know something else entirely. They know that beneath the glitter sits a darker world built on favors, secrets, and the kind of betrayal that can turn lifelong friendships into battlefields overnight. And nothing proved this more brutally than the scandal that erupted between Blake Lively, Taylor Swift, and Justin Baldoni. A wildfire that was supposed to stay behind locked doors, but instead tore through Hollywood like it had been waiting for years to happen. In the beginning, everything looked normal. Blake was riding on the image she had polished for years, the charming actress with the perfect marriage, the mom who balanced life effortlessly, the Hollywood golden girl with a smile that could convince the world she was made of sunshine. Taylor, on the other hand, was Hollywood's unstoppable force, turning albums into eras, friendships into headlines, and relationships into global trends. Together, the two looked inseparable. Fans treated them like a packaged friendship, glamorous, supportive, a duo so picture-perfect that people forgot the industry never allowed friendships to exist without an agenda attached. But the real shift began the day Justin Baldoni entered the picture. Justin wasn't the type of guy you could ignore. He had that calm charm, that "I know something you don't" energy that made people underestimate him until it was too late. As the director of It Ends With Us, he was dealing with pressure from every direction. Fans, studios, authors, investors. Everyone wanted the film to be flawless. Everyone wanted a piece of it. Except the piece he didn't expect was Blake's relentless grip on everything the film touched. No one in Hollywood will ever admit it publicly, but insiders whispered it for years. Blake Lively doesn't collaborate. She takes control. She doesn't join a project. She absorbs it, reshapes it, molds it into whatever narrative suits her image at that moment. And this time, her battle wasn't just with a director. Pulled in Taylor Swift, dragged in Ryan Reynolds, and eventually cornered Justin Baldoni until he had no choice but to fight back. But if the world had even a fraction of an idea of the tension brewing during those early months, maybe things wouldn't have exploded as violently as they did. The first crack appeared during a private dinner, a dinner that only a handful of people knew about, a dinner that Lasari himself heard described by someone who walked out in shock. Blake arrived late, wearing the expression of someone who had already decided she owned the room. Taylor was already seated, flipping through her phone, pretending not to notice Blake's entrance. The mood was off from the moment Blake sat down. No small talk, no fake Hollywood greetings, just silence filled with invisible accusations. Justin joined a few minutes later, looking like a man who regretted accepting the invitation the moment he walked in. Most people assumed the tension came from creative disagreements. But the truth, the real truth, was far more personal. Taylor had seen something. Taylor had heard something. Taylor had screenshotted something. And Blake knew it. The texts, the ones no one was supposed to see, had already been circulating in a small circle. And even though Taylor hadn't said a word about them publicly, Blake could feel that the walls were closing in. It wasn't just the content of the messages. It was the timing, the tone, the motive. Blake's words about Justin weren't the usual complaints actors make about directors. They were sharp, strategic, laced with something that bordered on sabotage. And the part that stung the most wasn't about Justin at all. It was the lines where she mocked, blamed, and insulted people she publicly called friends. People like Taylor, people like Selena, people like half of Hollywood. And this wasn't harmless gossip. It was Blake calculating how to bend the entire project around her preferences, even if it meant tearing down Justin, destroying the script, or rewriting scenes behind his back. Taylor didn't confront her immediately. That wasn't Taylor's style. She waited, observed, watched Blake spiral into a level of control that made directors, producers, and even crew members whisper in anger. But everything changed the night Justin finally pushed back. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a screaming match. It was a simple line in a meeting late at night, after 13 hours of filming. "Blake, with all due respect, this is not your film. A sentence that would have slid off anyone else, but to Blake, it was the spark that lit the bomb. The next morning, Blake's team began contacting producers. Studio execs suddenly received emails. Rumors started leaking that Justin was difficult, unprofessional, biased, overstepping, inexperienced, emotionally reactive. Words Blake would never say on camera, but ones she had no problem planting behind the scenes. But Hollywood isn't stupid. Hollywood remembers. Hollywood has witnesses. And by the time Justin realized he was being pushed out of his own project, Taylor had already pulled back. The friendship that once looked unbreakable began cracking.
I don't think I relate to any of my characters. I've played a crack addict from Boston. I've played an Upper East Side princess.
Because Blake never panics quietly. She panics loudly, aggressively, and with an energy that convinces her she can rewire the world around her. Which brings us to the night everything changed. The night of the leaked footage. The night Lashari heard the screaming match described word for word by someone who stood in the hallway pretending to check their phone just to avoid being pulled into the chaos. Blake was furious. The kind of fury that doesn't come from a single disagreement, but from layers of anxiety, insecurity, and the fear of being exposed. Justin stood his ground, refusing to let Blake rewrite scenes that weren't hers to rewrite. And the kiss, the one that would later haunt every headline, became the centerpiece of the argument. Blake wanted it shot her way. Justin insisted the original version felt more authentic. Blake accused him of undermining her character. Justin accused her of manipulating the emotional tone of the movie for her own image. They weren't arguing about a kiss. They were arguing about control. And then came the moment no one expected. A crew member, fed up, exhausted, tired of the tension, recorded a snippet of the fight on their phone. Not for drama, not for money, just as proof in case they ever needed to defend themselves. But Hollywood is a place where proof never stays hidden. Proof leaks. Proof travels. Proof finds its way into DMs, emails, burner accounts, private group chats. And when that video leaked, even in private circles, Taylor saw it. Not the public. Not fans. Taylor. And that was the moment she cut the cord. From the outside, it looked like nothing. No Instagram unfollows, no public shade, no dramatic tweets. Just silence. A silence louder than any call-out. Because Taylor's silence is never empty. It's strategic. And Blake felt every inch of it closing in on her. She tried to reach out, tried to patch things, tried to spin narratives, tried to make herself the victim. But Taylor wasn't interested. Because the texts weren't a misunderstanding. They weren't sarcasm. They weren't jokes. They were deliberate. They were manipulative. They were aimed at Justin, but they hit Taylor harder. And the most brutal part? Taylor wasn't angry because Blake insulted Justin. She was angry because Blake lied. Blake lied to her face, lied while smiling, lied while pretending to be a friend, lied while involving Taylor in the film's promotion, lied while acting like she was being mistreated, when in reality, she was the one creating havoc behind the scenes. The final blow came when Blake tried to blame everything on Justin. The delays, the reshoots, the budget problems, the creative conflict. Taylor wasn't buying it. Justin wasn't taking it. Hollywood wasn't believing it. And Blake's team started panicking. Because once Taylor steps back from someone, the industry follows. And everyone sensed that something massive was about to erupt. But no one, not even Blake herself, expected that the next leak would come from inside her own circle. A message, a screenshot, a conversation she never thought would see the light. And once that crack opened, the entire dam was ready to burst. Blake Lively always believed she could control a narrative. She thought she could walk into any room, tilt her head with that camera-trained smile, and the world would bend itself around her version of events. For years, Hollywood let her do exactly that. Directors tolerated it. Studios ignored it. Publicists cleaned it. Friends looked away. And the audience, enchanted by the picture she painted, never questioned the cracks hiding beneath the shine. But control is like a rope. The tighter you pull, the faster it burns your hands. And by the time the second wave of leaks hit, Blake wasn't holding the rope anymore. She was tangled in it. The first leak shook the ground beneath her, but the second one shattered whatever balance she still had left. It wasn't a video, a recording, or a studio memo. It was worse. It was the private conversation she had with someone she trusted. Someone who, in her mind, would have taken every secret to the grave. A late-night rant voice noted out of frustration, anger, and insecurity. And it wasn't just about Justin. It was about Taylor, about the industry, about the film, about why she believed she deserved more, why she deserved control, why she believed others were lucky she was even giving them her time. The moment Lashari heard about this leak, he knew the scandal had crossed a line from tension into chaos. The message wasn't flattering. It wasn't polite. It wasn't the carefully curated Hollywood version of Blake. It was raw, unfiltered, angry, a side she always kept behind locked doors but finally slipped through the cracks. Taylor didn't react publicly. She never does. Instead, she closed her circle even tighter. She stopped discussing the film, stopped giving Blake the benefit of the doubt, stopped entertaining the idea that this conflict was a misunderstanding. Taylor wasn't out for revenge. She wasn't plotting headlines or planning takedowns. The scariest part was the opposite. Taylor simply stepped back. And when Taylor steps back from someone, she does it in silence so heavy it crushes the air around the person she's leaving behind. Blake felt that silence like a fist closing around her throat. The panic began behind the scenes. Quiet phone calls, frantic meetings between her team, multiple strategy drafts. Her publicist tried to prepare statements that sounded calm, neutral, diplomatic. Blake rejected every single one. She wanted a narrative where she came out the victim, misunderstood, mistreated, pushed to the edge. The problem? No one else believed that anymore. Justin wasn't the kind of man who fought dirty, but he also wasn't the type to let himself become a target. And after weeks of staying quiet, he finally took a stand. Not through anger, not through accusations, through the one thing Blake couldn't overshadow, his professionalism. He met with producers, provided proof of every rewrite, every blocked scene, every unnecessary argument, every delay caused by Blake's control obsession. Crew members spoke up. Assistants, lighting techs, people who never make headlines but see everything. And the picture that formed was one Blake couldn't spin her way out of. Her power was slipping. Her reputation, the one thing she protected more fiercely than anything, was cracking in places no PR team could patch. Her team begged her to stay quiet. But Blake Lively has never been quiet a day in her life. She wanted explanations. She wanted loyalty. She wanted Taylor to pick up the phone. She wanted Justin to stop playing victim. She wanted the studios to have her back. She wanted the world to forget anything leaked. But the world had already heard enough. What made everything worse wasn't the leak itself. It was how Blake responded to it. Instead of calming the fire, she threw gasoline on it. She blamed miscommunication. She blamed editing. She blamed private frustration. She blamed creative pressure. She blamed anything that didn't force her to face the reality she had created. Meanwhile, Justin kept working, kept planning, kept moving forward. Hollywood respects quiet strength far more than loud excuses, and that difference created a shift Blake never saw coming. Producers who once bent to her demands started pulling away. Writers who used to say yes without question began saying no. Directors whispered to each other in private meetings, asking if Blake was worth the risk. And then came the rumor Blake feared more than anything. Studios were considering restructuring her deal. Not canceling, not blacklisting, just pulling back. That was worse than an outright ban. When Hollywood stops rejecting you and simply starts ignoring you, that's when careers fade quietly, without scandal, without explanation, without closure. Blake wasn't ready for that. She wasn't built for silence. She wasn't built for stepping back. She wasn't built for losing control. So she made the biggest mistake yet. She tried to fix things by reaching out to Taylor directly, not with an apology, but with a justification. Taylor didn't entertain a single sentence. The message went unread. Blake sent another, unread, another, unread. The silence became suffocating. Meanwhile, Justin wasn't out for revenge. He simply let the truth settle. He knew the industry would eventually see the difference between ego and integrity. And when more crew members stepped forward with their own quiet testimonies, the truth became impossible to hide. Blake's inner circle began shrinking. PR meetings grew tense. Phone calls ended cold. Brand partners started watching from a distance. Directors reconsidered future casting. Hollywood didn't push her out. It just stopped lifting her up. But the real blow came from where Blake least expected it. Her own fans. For the first time, the audience, the people who defended her at every turn, started questioning her. Not attacking, not canceling, just doubting. And doubt is deadlier than hate. It eats slowly, quietly, permanently. Blake felt every inch of it. There was no dramatic fall, no explosive meltdown caught on camera, no Hollywood exile. That would have made her a martyr. Instead, the industry simply reminded her she was not untouchable, not beyond consequence, not the center of the universe she built in her head. Taylor didn't slam the door. She simply stopped holding it open. Justin didn't attack. He simply let people see what had always been happening behind the scenes. And Blake, for the first time in her career, found herself standing in a spotlight she never wanted, the one that showed her flaws with brutal clarity. Hollywood didn't destroy her. It mirrored her. And she finally saw herself the way everyone else had been seeing her for months. In the end, the scandal didn't end with Blake gone. She wasn't canceled. She wasn't erased. But she wasn't the same either. She returned to the surface with a quieter voice, a humbler tone, a softened presence. Not because she learned a lesson, but because the world around her refused to let her rewrite this chapter. Justin emerged stronger. Taylor moved on effortlessly. And Blake remained suspended somewhere in the middle. Not fallen, not thriving, just floating in that uncomfortable place between past power and future uncertainty. A semi-open ending. A warning more than a conclusion. A reminder that Hollywood doesn't destroy you all at once. It destroys you slowly by showing you the truth. And Blake finally saw it.